The winter of 1879 stands as one of the most merciless in Dakota Territory's recorded history. When blizzards swept across the plains that December, they didn't discriminate between the settlers pushing west on promises of prosperity and the indigenous peoples whose ancestors had weathered countless such storms. But nature's brutality sometimes weaves together lives that would otherwise never meet, creating bonds that defy the divisions of a fractured frontier. This is the story of Elizabeth Eliza Carlisle, who at 8 years old became the sole survivor of a blizzard that claimed her entire family, and Morning Sky, the Lakota medicine woman who ventured out to recover bodies but instead found a child hovering between worlds. Before we begin this remarkable journey of survival and unexpected family, take a moment to imagine what you might do if everything familiar was suddenly stripped away, leaving you at the mercy of those you'd been taught to fear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Carlisle had never been one to shy away from risk. As a former Union Army captain turned schoolteacher in Philadelphia, he had watched his modest salary stretch increasingly thin, trying to support his wife Margaret and their 3 children. In a city where opportunity seemed reserved for those with the right connections or deeper pockets. "We deserve more than mere survival," he told Margaret one evening in the spring of 1879, after the children had gone to bed. "Out west, they say a man willing to work can actually build something meaningful." Margaret, who had been mending one of young Eliza's dresses for the 3rd time, looked up with worried eyes. "Thomas, we know no one there. The children have never known anything but city life." But Thomas had been collecting newspaper clippings for months, advertisements for homesteaders, government pamphlets singing praises of Dakota Territory's fertile soil, letters from a former Army colleague who'd established himself near a settlement called Riverton. James Holloway writes that they need a school teacher desperately. The town is growing, families arriving weekly. He's already spoken to the town council on my behalf. Thomas knelt beside his wife's chair. "Think of it, Margaret, our own land, fresh air for the children. William's asthma might improve away from the factory smoke." Eliza, then 7, hadn't meant to eavesdrop from the shadows of the hallway, but the conversation burned itself into her memory. The tension in her mother's posture, the desperate hope in her father's voice, and the way he'd laid out a tattered map on the floor afterward, tracing the route they would take west. By June, the decision had been made. The Carlisle family, Thomas and Margaret, 14-year-old William, 10-year-old Charlotte, and young Eliza, sold nearly everything they owned. They kept only what would fit in their wagon: essential tools, cooking implements, clothing, Margaret's cherished family Bible, and Thomas's small collection of books he would use to educate not only his own children, but those of Riverton's growing population. "You must each bring one treasure," Margaret had told the children, "something small to remind you of home when the journey grows difficult." William chose his grandfather's pocket watch. Charlotte selected her porcelain doll with the blue dress. Eliza, after much deliberation, packed her journal with its leather cover and the first-grade primer from which she'd learned to read. Technically 2 items, but her father had smiled and allowed the exception. The Carlisles joined the Miller-Reed expedition, 12 wagons strong, departing Philadelphia in early July. Most families were headed for the Black Hills, drawn by lingering gold fever despite reports that the rush had already peaked. The Carlisles planned to separate near the end, turning north toward Riverton while the others continued west. The first months of travel were marked by typical hardships: broken axles, river crossings that left everyone soaked and irritable, and occasional illnesses that swept through the traveling party. But there was unexpected joy, too. Eliza recorded these moments faithfully in her journal with her still-developing handwriting: evening sing-alongs around campfires, William teaching her to fish in clear streams, her mother's delight when a patch of wild strawberries was discovered. Alongside the trail. "I think my favorite thing about traveling west," she wrote in August, "is that every day brings a different view. Father says we're seeing America as God intended, before cities and railroads carved it up." By September, the expedition had reached the Missouri River, where they resupplied at Fort Thompson. There, Thomas received a letter forwarded from James Holloway with troubling news. An early frost had damaged crops around Riverton, and tensions between settlers and nearby Lakota communities had increased after a cattle dispute. James advised waiting until spring to complete the journey. Thomas shared the letter with Margaret that night, but Eliza overheard their whispered conference from her bedroll. "We can't turn back now," Thomas insisted. "Our funds won't stretch through a winter in the fort. And what message would that send to the children? What message are we sending by risking their lives?" Margaret countered, her voice tight with fear. "The territories are different in winter, Thomas. This isn't a Philadelphia snowfall we can watch from behind glass windows." But Thomas had always been stubborn when it came to his plans. Most of the Miller-Reed party elected to winter at Fort Thompson, but Thomas convinced two other families, the Nortons with their twin teenage sons and elderly Mr. Cooper, traveling, to join his daughter's family, to press on toward their destinations. 3 wagons can move faster than 12, Thomas reasoned. We'll reach Riverton before the worst weather hits. For a few weeks, it seemed Thomas's gamble might pay off. October brought crisp mornings, but pleasant afternoons as they traveled north. The landscape transformed around them, the rolling prairies giving way to sparser, more rugged terrain. Eliza filled more pages in her journal, marveling at prairie dog towns and the massive herds of pronghorn that sometimes paralleled their journey. "Charlotte says they're not real antelope," she wrote, "though that's what everyone calls them. Father showed us in his book of animals that they're their own special kind of creature, found nowhere else in the world." By early November, Riverton was still more than 100 miles distant when the weather changed dramatically. The first snow fell earlier than even the most cautious predictions. Thomas pushed the small company harder, extending travel hours into dusk, becoming increasingly short-tempered as temperatures fell. The Nortons parted ways on November 20th, turning northwest toward their own destination. Mr. Cooper, whose rheumatism had worsened with the cold, reluctantly accepted Margaret's suggestion that he ride in their wagon. Their pace slowed further. "We should have stayed at the fort," Margaret said one evening, not bothering to lower her voice as she stoked their meager fire. The children pretended not to hear, huddled together under shared blankets. "We're committed now," Thomas replied, the certainty in his voice betrayed by the worry lines etched deeply around his eyes. 4, maybe 5 days more if the weather holds." The weather did not hold. On December 2nd, while crossing a high, exposed plateau, the sky darkened with unnatural speed. The temperature plummeted as the wind rose. Within an hour, they were engulfed in a whiteout, a prairie blizzard of terrifying intensity. "Shelter!" Thomas shouted over the wind's howl. But there was nothing but open ground for miles in every direction. They pushed on blindly, hoping to reach a creek bed Thomas believed lay ahead, where at least they might find some protection from the wind. They never found it. The horses, panicked by the stinging snow and unable to see, veered from the trail. The wagon wheel struck a hidden rock, cracking the axle. Thomas and William attempted repairs as Margaret, Charlotte, and Eliza huddled with Mr. Cooper in the wagon. But the temperature continued to drop, and the tools became impossible to handle. With numbing fingers, "We have to create shelter here," Thomas finally admitted, his beard crusted with ice. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival. They overturned the wagon to block the wind, piled their belongings to create windbreaks, and huddled together, beneath every blanket and piece of clothing they possessed. Thomas kept talking through that first night, telling stories, making plans for when they reached Riverton, reminding the children of the springtime flowers they would see when winter finally released its grip. By the second day, no one spoke, much at all. Conservation of energy became essential. Eliza drifted between sleep and waking, dreaming of their warm Philadelphia home. Once, she thought she heard her mother singing a lullaby, though Margaret's lips were blue and barely moving. Cooper died first, quietly slipping away during the second night. William went next, his asthma-weakened lungs unable to cope with the bitter cold. Charlotte held Eliza tightly, even as her own shivering gradually ceased. Thomas was the last to go, still trying to shield his wife and youngest daughter with his body. Long after Margaret had stopped responding to his voice, Eliza remembered none of this clearly afterward. What she did remember was the profound silence when the storm finally abated on the morning of the third day. She remembered the strange sense of warmth that replaced the biting cold, and how comfortable she felt despite being buried beneath her family's stiff, cold bodies. She remembered trying to wake Charlotte, then her parents, unable to understand why they wouldn't respond. She remembered being thirsty, so desperately thirsty, and eating snow until her insides ached with cold again. And she remembered crawling out from beneath the overturned wagon into a world transformed into a vast sea of white, taking her journal from her mother's frozen satchel and beginning to walk because staying meant accepting that her family would never wake. In the strange logic of a child's mind on the edge of death herself, Eliza believed if she could just find Riverton, find Mr. Holloway, someone could come back and help her family wake up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morning Sky had not planned to venture so far from the winter camp. At 52 winters, she had earned the right to remain by the fire when blizzards ravaged the plains, leaving the dangerous task of hunting and scouting to younger members of the tribe. Yet something had pulled at her consciousness throughout. The night, disturbing her dreams with visions of a small fire flickering on the edge of darkness, about to be extinguished. "Where are you going, grandmother?" Swift River, her 19-year-old grandson, called as she prepared her horse before dawn. The blizzard had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a pristine white landscape under a crystal-clear sky. "There. Are spirits calling?" she replied simply, securing extra furs and provisions to her saddle. "Perhaps the ancestors, perhaps something else." Swift River frowned. "Then I will accompany you." Morning Sky studied her grandson's face, so much like his father's, her son who had been taken by smallpox 5 winters before. "No. Chief Running Fox needs strong hunters today. The people are hungry after 3 days without fresh meat." "And if you don't return by nightfall?" Morning Sky smiled. "Then you may track an old woman's trail tomorrow." She patted the medicine pouch at her waist. "But I will return. The spirits have work for me still." Her journey took her southwest, away from the sheltered valley where the Ochethi band had established their winter camp. The decision wasn't conscious. Morning Sky simply allowed her mare to choose the path, trusting the intuition that had guided her through 5 decades as a healer and keeper of medicines. The snow-covered landscape might have appeared featureless to outsiders, but Morning Sky read it like a complex text. Here, a fox had tunneled beneath the snow in pursuit of a mouse. There, a small herd of deer had passed, heading toward a distant creek where they might paw through snow to reach water. The wind had sculpted the snow into graceful drifts against exposed rock faces, creating momentary art that would vanish with the next storm. By midday, she had traveled farther than intended and was considering turning back when she spotted unusual shapes breaking the smooth white horizon. As she drew closer, she recognized the unmistakable silhouette of an overturned wagon, the broken wheels jutting skyward like supplicant hands. "Wasichu," she murmured, "white settlers caught in the storm's wrath." Morning Sky approached cautiously. Relations between her people and the encroaching settlers had grown increasingly strained in recent years. The treaties made by the grandfathers had been repeatedly broken. Land promised in perpetuity had been seized after gold was discovered in the sacred Black Hills. Young warriors like her nephew Black Fox spoke of resistance, of fighting to preserve what remained of their territory and way of life. But Morning Sky had lived long enough to understand that enemies existed on both sides of any conflict, as did those who desired peace. Death in a blizzard was a terrible way to journey to the spirit world, regardless of one's people. The scene that awaited her confirmed what she had expected. The family had attempted to create shelter, but the merciless cold had claimed them. Nonetheless, Morning Sky dismounted and approached the bodies with respect, speaking softly in Lakota. "Your journey was difficult, but it is over now. May you find peace in the next world." She would not disturb their possessions. That was not her purpose here. She would report the location to tribal leaders, who would decide whether to inform the nearest military outpost or settlement. Despite growing hostilities, her people were not grave robbers. Morning Sky was about to remount her horse when something caught her attention, a trail of small footprints leading away from the wagon. The impressions were partially filled with wind-blown snow, suggesting they had been made hours earlier, perhaps at dawn. A child had survived. Following the tracks, Morning Sky noted their erratic pattern. Whoever had made them had been disoriented, changing direction frequently, occasionally wandering in circles before continuing. After nearly a mile, she found where the small traveler had fallen, the snow compacted by a small body. They had risen and continued, but the stride length shortened considerably afterward. Morning Sky rode ahead of the footprints, scanning the horizon. In the distance, she spotted a dark speck against the snow, motionless. Urging her horse forward, she covered the ground quickly, her heart heavy with what she expected to find. Another frozen body, this one small and alone. Instead, she found a child, a girl no more than 8 or 9 summers old, curled into a tight ball at the base of a stunted cottonwood tree. Her clothes were woefully inadequate for the bitter cold. A dress, coat, and thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her fingers, exposed to the elements, showed the mottled blue-white of advancing frostbite. Her auburn hair was frozen in clumps around a face so pale it nearly matched the snow. But most surprising of all, she was breathing. "Oxychangluta," Morning Sky whispered, using the Lakota word for child as she knelt beside the girl. "Little one." The girl's eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Working quickly, Morning Sky laid out a buffalo robe on the snow. She gently transferred the child onto it, then wrapped her completely, leaving only her face exposed. She secured this bundle to her horse before mounting. The nearest white settlement was at least 2 days' ride, and the child would not survive that journey. The winter camp was closer, half a day's ride if she pushed her mare hard. Morning Sky spoke softly to the semi-conscious child as they rode. "Hold on to this world, little one. It is not yet time for you to join your family in the spirit land. The ancestors have other plans for you." She alternated between Lakota and the English she had learned from the missionaries who had briefly established a school near their summer grounds years before. She didn't know if the girl could hear or understand, but voices sometimes anchored those hovering between worlds. By late afternoon, the child's condition had worsened. Her breathing became shallow and irregular. Twice, Morning Sky stopped to rub the girl's limbs vigorously through the buffalo robe, attempting to stimulate circulation. She spooned small amounts of melted snow into the child's cracked lips, adding a few drops of a medicinal tincture from her pouch, an infusion of willow bark and prairie coneflower that might help reduce fever. When they finally crested the ridge, overlooking the winter camp, the sun was already setting, painting the snowfield in shades of pink and gold. Morning Sky could see the smoke from 30 tippies rising in thin columns against the darkening sky. As she rode into camp, her appearance with the small bundle created immediate commotion. Women emerged from tipis, children gathered curiously, and several elders approached as she carefully dismounted, cradling the girl in her arms. "What have you brought us, Morning Sky?" Chief Running Fox asked, his weathered face concerned as he glimpsed the pale face within the buffalo robe. "A child of the Wasichu people," she replied. "The only survivor of a family caught in the blizzard." Murmurs spread through the gathering crowd. Black Fox pushed forward, his expression thunderous. "You bring a Wasichu into our camp, when their soldiers hunt our people, when they steal our land and break every promise." Morning Sky met her nephew's angry gaze steadily. "I bring a child who has lost everything and stands at death's door. Would you have me leave her to die alone in the snow?" Her people would leave. "Our children to die," Black Fox countered. "Perhaps," Morning Sky acknowledged. "And if we do the same, how are we different from those we despise?" Chief Running Fox raised his hand, silencing further argument. "The child comes into our camp under Morning Sky's protection. This is her right as an elder and medicine woman." He turned to Morning Sky. "Can she be saved?" Morning Sky looked down at the small face, now flushed with fever where before it had been deathly pale. "I do not know, but I will try." She carried the girl to her own teepee, where her granddaughter Little Dove had already stoked the fire to blazing warmth. Working methodically, Morning Sky removed the child's frozen clothing and examined her injuries. The frostbite on her fingers and toes was severe, but Morning Sky had treated worse cases that hadn't resulted in amputation. The fever was more concerning. Pneumonia had likely set in during the girl's desperate journey. Through the night, Morning Sky and Little Dove worked tirelessly. They wrapped the girl's extremities in poultices of specific herbs that drew out cold and improved circulation. They administered teas brewed from plants gathered during the summer months and preserved for winter healing. They bathed her fevered body with cool water, then wrapped her in soft furs as she shivered uncontrollably. Between treatments, Morning Sky sang the healing songs taught by her grandmother, who had learned them from her grandmother before her. The ancient melodies filled the tipi, their power undiminished by centuries of use. Near dawn, the girl's eyes opened for the first time, blue as a summer sky, wide with confusion and fear. "Mother," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Morning Sky moved into her line of vision, speaking softly in English. "Your mother is not here, little one. You are safe with me now." The girl's eyes filled with tears before sliding closed again, but her breathing had steadied, and the fever seemed to have broken. Morning Sky placed a gentle hand on the child's forehead. "You have survived the first night," she told the sleeping girl. "That took great strength. Now we will see what else the spirits have planned for you." As the new day dawned over the winter camp, bringing with it hushed conversations about the Wasichu child in their midst, Morning Sky finally rested beside her small patient, knowing the most immediate danger had passed. The greater challenges, explaining to a child that her entire family was gone, deciding her fate, and navigating the tensions her presence would create within the tribe, those would come with time. For now it was enough that the small flame she had seen in her dreams still flickered. The next week passed in a haze for Eliza. She drifted between consciousness and fever dreams, sometimes calling for her mother or father, other times lying still and silent as Morning Sky tended to her frostbitten extremities. The Lakota medicine woman worked tirelessly, applying poultices and herbal remedies that filled the teepee with pungent aromas unfamiliar to the child. On the 7th day, Eliza woke with clarity for the first time. Winter sunlight filtered through the smoke hole of the teepee, casting a golden beam across the furs where she lay. She blinked, taking in her surroundings, the central fire pit with its carefully banked embers, the hanging bundles of dried plants, the painted symbols adorning The interior of the hide walls, also different from anything in her experience. When she tried to sit up, pain lanced through her hands and feet. Eliza gasped, drawing the attention of the young woman who sat nearby, grinding something with a stone mortar and pestle. "Grandmother!" the young woman called out, setting aside her work. "She wakes." Moments later, the hide entrance flap lifted, and an older woman entered. Her silver-streaked black hair arranged in 2 long braids, her face, lined by decades of weather and experience, held a dignified serenity that immediately commanded respect. Yet her eyes, when they met Eliza's, contained unexpected warmth. "Good morning, little one," the woman said in accented but clear English. "You have slept long." Eliza tried to respond, but her throat felt raw and parched. The younger woman quickly brought a wooden cup filled with cool water, mixed with something sweet-tasting. "Slowly," the elder cautioned as Eliza gulped desperately. "Small sips." After drinking, Eliza found her voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. "Where am I? Where's my mother? My father?" A shadow passed across the older woman's face. "I am Morning Sky. This is my granddaughter, Little Dove. You are in our winter camp." "But my family," Eliza began, a terrible understanding already dawning. Morning Sky sat beside her, taking care not to jostle Eliza's bandaged hands. "Your family walks now in the spirit world, little one. They did not survive the great storm." Though part of Eliza had known this truth since crawling out from beneath the overturned wagon days ago, hearing it spoken aloud broke something inside her. She began to sob, deep, wrenching cries that shook her small frame and reopened the cracks in her chapped lips. Morning Sky didn't attempt to quiet her grief. Instead, she remained present, occasionally stroking Eliza's hair with a gentle hand, allowing the pain its necessary expression. Little Dove quietly slipped out of the tipi, giving the child privacy in her mourning. "My name is Elizabeth Carlyle," Eliza finally said, when her tears had subsided into hiccuping breaths. "But everyone calls me Eliza." "Eliza," Morning Sky repeated, nodding. "A good name, strong." "Are you Indians?" Eliza asked, the question emerging with childlike directness. "We are Lakota," Morning Sky corrected gently. "One of the 7 council fires of the Ocheti-Shakoving, what your people call Sioux." Fear flickered across Eliza's face. Even at 8, she had absorbed the frontier prejudices about wild Indians from overheard adult conversations during their journey west. Morning Sky recognized the fear, but didn't comment on it directly. "You need more rest, your body fights, to heal." She indicated Eliza's bandaged extremities. "The cold tried to take your fingers and toes, but we are convincing them to stay." Eliza glanced down, noticing for the first time the careful wrappings around her hands and feet, infused with a greenish paste that smelled strongly of pine and something else she couldn't identify. Will I lose them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not if I can help it," Morning Sky replied with quiet confidence. "But you must be patient. Healing takes time." Over the next days, as Eliza's strength gradually returned, she began to form a clearer picture of her situation. She was in a Lakota winter camp consisting of about 30 teepees arranged in a traditional circle. Morning Sky, she learned, was not only a respected elder, but the tribe's primary healer, knowledgeable in medicinal plants and spiritual healing, practices passed down through generations. Little Dove, who at 17 had already lost her parents to a smallpox outbreak, was Morning Sky's apprentice in the healing arts. Though initially shy around Eliza, she proved to be kind and increasingly curious about the white child's background. Not everyone in the camp shared Morning Sky's acceptance of the young outsider. Eliza quickly became aware of divided opinions. regarding her presence. Some, like Chief Running Fox and his wife Quietwater, treated her with dignified courtesy when they visited Morning Sky's tipi. Others, particularly a stern-faced warrior named Black Fox, made no attempt to hide their disapproval. "The Wasichu brings danger to our people," Black Fox declared during one heated council meeting that Eliza overheard from inside the teepee. "When she is strong enough, she should be taken to the fort at Standing Rock. And what will the blue coats do with her?" Morning Sky countered. "Put her in their school where they cut children's hair and forbid our language? Or send her to some distant orphanage where no one knows her name? That is not our concern," Black Fox insisted. "She is not our blood." "All children are our concern," Morning Sky replied with the authority of her position. "Would you have us become like the worst of the Wasichu, who see no value in lives different from their own?" The debate continued beyond Eliza's ability to stay awake, but she gathered that Morning Sky had won at least a temporary reprieve. She would remain in the camp until fully healed. After that, her fate remained uncertain. As February's bitter cold gradually yielded to March's tentative thaw, Eliza's recovery accelerated. The frostbite on her extremities healed better than expected, though 2 of her smallest toes and the tip of 1 finger had been lost to the cold. Morning Sky's treatments had saved the rest, leaving only slight discoloration that the medicine woman assured her would fade with time. Physically stronger, Eliza began venturing outside the teepee on clear days, wrapped in a small buffalo robe Little Dove had made specifically for her. Her first attempts at walking were painful and awkward, but determination drove her forward, one halting step at a time. The camp's children watched her with undisguised curiosity. Some kept their distance, following their parents' example of suspicion toward the Wasichu child. Others, too young to have absorbed adult prejudices, approached cautiously to inspect her auburn hair and blue eyes, features so different from their own. One boy, about 6 years old, finally broke the silence one afternoon as Eliza sat outside the teepee, soaking up rare March sunshine. "Your hair is the color of autumn leaves," he announced, reaching out to touch a strand that had escaped from her braid. "And yours is like a raven's wing," Eliza replied, remembering a phrase from one of her father's books. The boy giggled, then introduced himself as Jumping Rabbit. Within days, he became Eliza's first friend, unofficial translator, and guide to camp life. Through him, she began learning simple Lakota words and phrases, much to Morning Sky's approval. "2 tongues are better than 1, the elder observed, as Eliza proudly demonstrated her growing vocabulary over dinner one evening. By early April, Eliza had established a routine within the camp. Mornings were spent helping Little Dove with simple tasks, sorting dried herbs, fetching water from the nearby stream as her strength improved, or tending the fire. Afternoons often found her playing with Jumping Rabbit and several other children who had gradually accepted her presence, teaching them counting games from Philadelphia while learning their traditional string games and stories in return. But nights remained difficult. In the quiet darkness, memories of her family returned with crushing force. Sometimes she woke, crying out for her mother, other times silently weeping into the soft fur bedding. Morning Sky never scolded her for these episodes. Instead, she would often sing softly, healing songs that seemed to reach something deep inside Eliza, temporarily easing the ache of loss. One night, after a particularly vivid dream of her sister Charlotte, Eliza found herself unable to return to sleep. Morning Sky, attuned to her young patient's distress, sat up and added a small branch to the fire. "Would you like to speak of your dream?" she asked softly. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. "I saw my sister. She was smiling and telling me it wasn't my fault." Tears welled in her eyes. "But it is my fault. I left them. I should have stayed." Morning Sky considered this before responding. If you had stayed, your spirit would now walk with theirs. Instead, it was your path to continue here. She adjusted her shawl around her shoulders. This is not a small thing to survive when others do not. It creates a debt. A debt? Eliza asked, wiping her eyes. To those who have gone ahead, yes. You must live well enough for yourself and for them. Honor their memory by becoming someone worthy of the gift of continued life. Eliza pondered this, finding unexpected comfort in the concept. My father wanted to be a teacher in a town called Riverton, she said after a while. He said education was the greatest gift one person could give another. Morning Sky nodded. A wise man, your father. I still have my primer and journal, Eliza said. They were in my pocket when you found me. The items had been carefully dried and returned to her once she was strong enough to hold them. Perhaps you will be a teacher one day, like your father wished to be, Morning Sky suggested. Eliza considered this possibility, a future extending beyond her current limbo between worlds. It seemed both impossible and necessary, a tiny flame of purpose, flickering in the darkness of her loss. But who would teach me now? She asked, the practical question of an 8-year-old mind. Morning Sky smiled. There are many kinds of education, Eliza Carlyle. Not all learning comes from books. For now you learn our ways, how to live with the land, how to use what the earth provides, how to see with more than your eyes. She paused. And I think perhaps we learn from you as well. That night, for the first time since the blizzard, Eliza slept dreamlessly and deeply, Morning Sky's words acting as a balm to her wounded spirit. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for this moment, in this place between two worlds, she had found a temporary haven in which to begin healing not just her body, but her heart. Spring arrived on the prairie with sudden intensity, transforming the landscape almost overnight. Snow retreated into shadowed ravines, stubborn patches shrinking. Daily beneath the strengthening sun, the frozen creek that had sustained the winter camp with laboriously cut ice now flowed freely, its waters swollen with snowmelt from distant hills. With the changing season came preparations for the camp's migration to summer hunting grounds. For generations, the Lakota had followed this seasonal rhythm. Winters spent in sheltered valleys where wood and water remained accessible despite deep snow, summers spent following the buffalo herds across expansive grasslands. The impending move forced the long-delayed decision about Eliza's future. On a mild April evening, Chief Running Fox called a formal council to determine the white child's fate. Unlike previous discussions, Eliza had overheard from inside Morning Sky's teepee. This time, she was invited to attend. They will ask you questions, Morning Sky explained, as she braided Eliza's hair, which had grown longer during her months with the tribe. Answer with a clear voice and an open heart. Show them the person you are, not just the color of your skin. Eliza nodded solemnly, though anxiety knotted her stomach. In the 4 months since Morning Sky had found her half frozen in the snow, she had come to understand the precarious nature of her position. The winter camp had provided sanctuary during her recovery, but with spring mobility restored, practical questions loomed large. The council gathered in the center of the camp as twilight descended. Elders sat in a semicircle, their weathered faces solemn in the firelight. Behind them stood younger adults of the tribe, with children peering curiously from the periphery. Chief Running Fox occupied the central position, flanked by his closest advisors. Morning Sky led Eliza to stand before the assembled leaders. Though small for her age and still thin from her ordeal, Eliza stood straight, her blue eyes meeting those of the council members without flinching. Eliza Carlyle, Chief Running Fox began in careful English, you have lived among us through the winter moons. Morning Sky has healed your body. Now we must decide what becomes of you. Black Fox, who had consistently advocated for returning Eliza to white settlements, spoke first. The spring trading party leaves for Fort Standing Rock in 7 days. The Wasichu child should go with them. The soldiers there will find her proper place among her own kind. Several council members nodded. Agreement, but Quietwater, the chief's wife, raised her hand to speak. "I have watched this child," she said, her English less practiced than her husband's. "She learns our ways quickly, shows respect, works hard despite small hands." She gestured toward Little Dove. "Helps with medicines. Good heart." An elder named Stone Path, whose grandson had died the previous winter, leaned forward on his walking stick. "What does the child herself wish? She has seen 8 winters, old enough to know her mind." All eyes turned to Eliza. The question, so direct, momentarily robbed her of speech. What did she wish? The answer seemed both simple and impossible. "I wish my family hadn't died," she said finally, her voice small but steady. "But they did, and I can't change that." She glanced at morning sky, drawing strength from the elder's calm presence. "I don't want to go to the fort. The soldiers might send me far away to people who never knew my mother or father or brother or sister, who never knew me." She took a deep breath. "Morning sky saved me. She teaches me. I want to stay and learn from her. I can be useful. I'm learning to identify plants, and I can read English words. I could help if traders come with written messages." This practical point seemed to register with several council members, who exchanged thoughtful glances. Black Fox was unmoved. "The Wasichu will look for her. When they find a white child in a Lakota camp, they will not ask how she came to be. There, they will take her and punish us." "Not if she chooses to stay," Morning Sky countered. "I found her nearly dead in the snow, far from any Wasichu settlement. I brought her here when she had nowhere else. The Great Spirit guided me to her. If for a reason," Chief Running Fox raised his hand, silencing the debate. "Eliza Carlyle, do you understand what staying means? We follow the buffalo soon. Our summer camp moves many times. Life is not easy. You would live as Lakota, not Wasichu." Eliza nodded solemnly. "I understand. And if someday Wasichu officials come, you will tell them you stay by choice?" "Yes," Eliza affirmed, stronger now. "I will tell them." The chief considered this, then turned to Morning Sky. "And you, old friend, you would take this child as your own?" Morning Sky placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder. "I already have. The winter has made us family." After further discussion among the elders, conducted in Lakota, too rapid for Eliza to follow, Chief Running Fox announced his decision. "Eliza Carlyle stays with Morning Sky until she has seen 13 winters. Then she may choose again, to remain or to return to Wasichu ways." He fixed Eliza with a serious gaze. 5 winters to learn our path, 5 winters to grow strong, then decide with woman's eyes, not child's. Relief flooded through Eliza, so intense that her knees nearly buckled. Morning Sky's hand on her shoulder steadied her as the council dispersed. The matter settled for now. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Eliza worked up the courage to ask the question that had been forming in her mind. "Why did you fight for me to stay?" "Black Fox is right. I could bring trouble." Morning Sky arranged her sleeping furs before answering. "Many winters ago, when I was younger than Little Dove is now, I had a daughter, my first child. The winter was harsh, like the one that took your family. She fell through river ice." Her voice grew soft with remembrance. "I could not reach her in time." Eliza sat very still, absorbing this unexpected glimpse into Morning Sky's past. The current took her body away beneath the ice. "We never found her to perform proper burial rites." Morning Sky looked directly at Eliza. "I have always wondered, did someone find her when the spring thaw came? Did they treat her remains with respect or leave them for animals to scatter?" She touched Eliza's cheek gently. "When I found you, I thought at first you were dead, another child claimed by winter. But you fought to live. Perhaps the daughter I lost guided me to you. Perhaps this is how balance returns to the world. The depth of this connection, two lives bridged by loss across the decades, left Eliza speechless. She could only lean forward and rest her head against Morning Sky's shoulder, a gesture that conveyed what words could not. The camp's migration began a week later. Teepees were dismantled, their components separated and loaded onto travois pulled by horses. Eliza watched with fascination as the only home she'd known since the blizzard disappeared, transformed into bundles and parcels distributed among the tribe's horses and dogs. Little Dove showed her how to pack the medicinal supplies, wrapping dried herbs in soft hides and securing them in parfleche containers decorated with geometric designs. These patterns tell what's inside, Little Dove explained, tracing a particular arrangement of triangles. This marks fever medicines. This one, she pointed to another design, shows wound treatments. Like writing, Eliza observed. Little Dove nodded. Yes, different kind of marks, same purpose. By midday, no trace of the winter camp remained, except for fire pits and the packed earth where teepees had stood. Chief Running Fox led the procession westward, following ancient pathways known to generations of Lakota. Women and children walked alongside the heavily laden travois, while warriors rode ahead and alongside as scouts and protectors. Eliza traveled with Morning Sky and Little Dove, helping to manage their small travois pulled by Morning Sky's elderly mare. Her still healing feet ached by day's end, but she refused to complain, determined to prove her worth to the community that had accepted her. The journey to the summer hunting grounds took nearly 2 weeks, with the tribe making camp each evening and continuing at dawn. Each new landscape revealed wonders to Eliza, prairie dog towns, where hundreds of the small creatures stood sentinel beside their burrows, marshes alive with migratory birds returning from southern wintering grounds, and finally the vast rolling grasslands where buffalo herds would soon gather. The summer camp was established near the confluence of 2 small rivers, providing abundant water and a natural boundary that helped protect the teepees from potential attack. Here the sheltering circle was recreated, with Morning Sky's dwelling placed in the traditional position for a healer near the eastern entrance to the camp. As the women established the new encampment, the men prepared for the first major buffalo hunt of the season. Hunting parties had already spotted a sizable herd grazing several days' ride to the southwest. "Will you go with them?" Eliza asked Little Dove as they collected water from the river. Little Dove shook her head. "Women don't hunt buffalo. Too dangerous. We prepare for their return. Sharpen knives, ready containers for meat and organs." She smiled at Eliza. "Much work comes after hunting. Every part of buffalo has purpose." The hunters departed at dawn, led by Chief Running Fox, and including most able-bodied men. Even Black Fox, who still regarded Eliza with suspicion, acknowledged her with a slight nod as the hunting party rode past Morning Sky's teepee. "He begins to accept you," Morning Sky observed. Slowly, like spring ice melting. With the men away, the camp fell into a different rhythm. Older boys practiced with small bows, improving their skills for future hunts. Women repaired clothing and prepared storage containers for the anticipated bounty. Children helped with chores, but found ample time for games in the tall grass surrounding the camp. Eliza, now moving comfortably between both worlds, spent mornings working alongside Morning Sky and afternoons teaching Jumping Rabbit and several other children letters from her primer. This informal school session, conducted on a sun-warmed hillside overlooking the camp, initially raised eyebrows among some of the more traditional elders. But when Jumping Rabbit proudly showed his grandmother how he could write his name in English characters, objections gradually subsided. On the 5th day after the hunters' departure, scouts returned with news. The hunt had been successful. The camp erupted in activity, preparing for the processing work ahead. By nightfall, the hunting party returned triumphant, having taken 17 buffalo in a carefully coordinated chase. The following days introduced Eliza to yet another aspect of Lakota life, the communal butchering and preservation of the hunt's bounty. Under Morning Sky and Little Dove's guidance, she learned to cut thin strips of meat for drying, to extract marrow from bones, to scrape hides for eventual tanning. The work was bloody and exhausting, but she threw herself into it with determination, earning grudging respect from women who had previously kept their distance. As May yielded to June, Eliza realized something profound had shifted within her. The constant, crushing grief that had followed her from the blizzard had not disappeared. She still dreamt of her family, still missed them, with an ache that sometimes took her breath away. But alongside that, grief had grown something new. Belonging. She was no longer simply a survivor, a child caught between worlds. She was becoming Wichapi Luta, Red Star, the name Morning Sky had given her during the summer solstice ceremony, marking her formal adoption into the tribe. A new identity forged in the crucible of loss, but tempered by the unexpected grace of finding a second family beneath the vast Dakota sky. 3 summers passed in the rhythm of Lakota life. Eliza, now 11 and growing tall, moved confidently between tasks that would have been unimaginable to the city-raised child who had left Philadelphia. Her hands, once soft and suited only for holding books and pencils, had grown capable and strong. She could butcher a rabbit in minutes, tan hides using techniques passed down through countless generations, and identify dozens of medicinal plants that Morning Sky had taught her to gather and prepare. Her appearance had changed as well. Sun had burnished her fair skin to a golden hue, and her auburn hair, worn in 2 long braids adorned with beaded leather ties, reached the middle of her back. She dressed in Lakota clothing, a deerskin dress decorated with porcupine quillwork that Little Dove had helped her create. Leggings for riding and moccasins she had crafted herself during the previous winter's long evenings. Yet beneath these external transformations, she maintained connections to her first life. Each night before sleeping, she practiced reading from her tattered primer, preserving her literacy through sheer determination. Her journal, its pages carefully rationed, recorded her experiences in increasingly sophisticated English. Occasionally, she permitted herself to write about her family, memories of William teaching her to whistle, Charlotte arranging her hair with ribbons, her father's deep voice reading stories by lamplight, her mother's hands shaping bread dough. These written remembrances served as private ceremonies, honoring those she had lost while acknowledging how far she had traveled from the child they had known. The tribe had gradually accepted her presence, even those initially most skeptical. Black Fox, while never demonstrably warm, had progressed from open hostility to gruff tolerance, occasionally bringing unusual plants for Morning Sky's medicine collection with the explanation that the red-haired one should learn these too. In the late summer of her 3rd year with the Lakota, as the tribe prepared for the annual Sundance ceremony, an unexpected visitor arrived at their camp. Eliza was helping to prepare hides for a new teepee when the commotion began. Warriors, riding out to meet an approaching horseman, women calling children back from play areas, elders gathering near Chief Running Fox's dwelling. "Stay here," Morning Sky instructed as she emerged from their teepee, headdress in place, looking every inch the respected medicine woman she was. Eliza obeyed, but positioned herself where she could observe the proceedings. The visitor, she soon realized, was a white man, the first she had seen since the blizzard had claimed her family. He wore the distinctive blue uniform of the U.S. Army and carried himself with the confident authority of an officer. Something cold and anxious, settled in Eliza's stomach as she watched him dismount and approach Chief Running Fox. Their conversation, conducted through a translator, appeared tense but civil. After several minutes, the chief gestured toward Morning Sky's teepee, toward Eliza. Heart pounding, she retreated inside, unsure whether to hide or stand her ground. Before she could decide, Morning Sky entered, her expression serious, but not alarmed. "A soldier from Fort Standing Rock asks about a white child," she explained. "Reports came from traders who visited during spring gathering, a man named Lieutenant Baker." Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she set aside the scraping tool she had been using on the hide. "What does he want?" "To see you, to ask questions." Morning Sky sat beside her. "Remember what Chief Running Fox said when you first stayed with us? That someday soldiers might come." Eliza nodded. "And I promised to tell them I stay by choice." "That time has come sooner than we thought," Morning Sky acknowledged. "Are you still certain of your choice?" The question gave Eliza pause, not because she doubted her decision to remain with the Lakota, but because facing this representative of the white world suddenly made her previous life seem less distant. Somewhere beyond the prairie existed cities with buildings and streets, schools where children sat at desks instead of on hillsides, churches with stained glass windows like the one her family had attended in Philadelphia. Yet none of those places held anyone who knew her, who cared for her, as Morning Sky and Little Dove did. None contained the sense of belonging she had found here. "I'm certain," she said firmly. Morning Sky nodded. "Then speak your truth. I will be with you." Lieutenant James Baker of the 7th Cavalry was a lean, weathered man with a neatly trimmed mustache and watchful eyes. He had removed his hat upon entering the teepee, revealing close-cropped brown hair. His demeanor was cautious, but not overtly hostile as he took in the dwelling's interior, his gaze finally settling on Eliza. "This is the child?" he asked the translator, an elderly half-French, half-Lakota man who had accompanied him from the fort. "I am Eliza Carlyle," she answered in clear English before the translator could speak, deciding it was best to establish her identity and capabilities immediately. Baker's eyebrows rose slightly. "You speak English well." "It was my first language. Sir, I was born in Philadelphia." The lieutenant studied her, noting her Lakota clothing and braided hair. "How did you come to be living among the Sioux?" Eliza told her story without embellishment. The blizzard, the loss of her family, Morning Sky finding her nearly dead in the snow, the healing and eventual adoption into the tribe. Throughout her account, Baker took notes in a small, leather-bound book, occasionally asking for clarification on specific points. "And you were how old when this happened?" he asked. "8, sir. I'm 11 now. Do you have other family, relatives who might be searching for you?" Eliza shook her head. "My mother's parents died before I was born. My father's father died in the war, and his mother passed when I was 5. There were cousins in Philadelphia, but we weren't close." Baker nodded slowly, making another note. "The reason for my inquiry, Miss Carlyle, is that the Army maintains records of missing persons, particularly children. When traders reported seeing a white girl among this band, I was dispatched to investigate." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "There are schools established for the education and proper upbringing of white children who have been separated from civilized society." Morning Sky, who had been silently observing the exchange, straightened at this. The translator conveyed her words. "The child receives education here. She reads her books each night. She learns our medicine ways. Her mind grows strong." Baker acknowledged this with a nod that stopped short of agreement. "Nevertheless, it is unusual for a white child to remain among Indians when alternatives exist." With respect, Lieutenant, Eliza said, struggling to maintain her composure in the face of what she recognized as a threat to her new life. I am not being held against my will. Morning skies saved me when I would have died. The tribe accepted me when I had nowhere else to go. You were a child of 8 making such decisions, Baker pointed out. Now that you're older, and I'm here to offer passage to the fort, I choose to stay, Eliza interrupted, her voice stronger now. This is my home. These are my people now. Baker studied her face, seeming to search for signs of coercion or fear. Finding none, he sighed. My orders are to investigate and report, not to remove anyone by force. He closed his notebook. But I am obligated to inform my superiors of your situation. They may have different instructions. After the lieutenant departed, escorted to the camp's edge by tribal warriors, an emergency council was convened. Unlike the formal gathering 3 years earlier that had decided Eliza's initial fate, this meeting had the urgent quality of crisis management. The Blue Coats will return, Black Fox predicted grimly. This Lieutenant Baker saw a white girl dressed as Lakota, speaking perfect English. He will tell his commanders. She told him she stays by choice, Morning Sky countered. He heard her. Clear words. Chief Running Fox, his face more deeply lined than when Eliza had first met him, raised his hand for silence. What Baker believes matters less than what his superiors command. If they send soldiers to take Wichapi-Luta, we cannot stop them without bloodshed. The truth of this assessment hung heavily in the air. Relations between the Lakota and the U.S. government had deteriorated steadily in recent years. Treaties were broken with increasing frequency as white settlement expanded. Military presence at nearby forts had doubled, with patrols regularly encroaching on traditional hunting grounds. We could leave, Little Dove suggested, move camp to the north, deeper into unceded territory. Several council members nodded agreement, but Stone Path, now bent with age but still sharp-minded, shook his head. Running only delays. Blue Coats have many horses, many guns. They search until they find. Then what can we do? Quiet Water asked, voicing the question in everyone's mind. We can make her truly one of us, came an unexpected voice. Black Fox had risen to his feet, his expression resolute. Not just in how she dresses or the name she uses, but in ways the Wasichu must recognize. All eyes turned to him as he continued. My sister's son, Yellow Horse, has completed his vision quest and seeks a wife. If Wichapi-Luta were joined to him in marriage, she would have status the Blue Coats must acknowledge. A white woman married to a Lakota man cannot be taken against her will. Even their own laws say this. Shocked silence followed this proposal. Yellow Horse was 20 summers old, a respected young warrior who had distinguished himself in recent conflicts with enemy tribes. The suggestion of marriage to 11-year-old Eliza, though technically permissible under tribal custom for a girl approaching womanhood, was clearly a strategic maneuver rather than a natural match. Morning Sky was the first to recover her voice. She is too young, has not even had her first moon time. This is not our way to use marriage as shield. It would be in name only until she is of age, Black Fox argued. Yellow Horse understands this. He would protect her rights as his wife, before the Wasichu law, but make no demands. Chief Running Fox turned to Eliza, who had remained silent throughout this discussion. Wichapi-Luta, you have heard this proposal. It is your future being decided. What do you say? Eliza's mind raced. Marriage, even in name only, had never entered her consideration. She knew Yellow Horse, a serious, quiet young man who had always treated her with distant courtesy. He was neither cruel nor unkind, but the prospect of being legally bound to him, of using such a bond as protection against removal, felt profoundly unsettling. I thank Black Fox for his concern, she said carefully, but there must be another way. I don't wish to disrespect Yellow Horse by entering a false marriage, nor do I think Lieutenant Baker would be deceived by such an arrangement made immediately after his visit. Morning Sky nodded approval. The child shows wisdom. We seek true protection, not temporary tricks. As the council continued debating options, Eliza's thoughts turned to the lieutenant's notebook. He had written everything: her name, her story, her expressed desire to remain with the Lakota. Those written words would travel to Fort Standing Rock, would be read by military officials, perhaps even forwarded to higher authorities who had never met her, never witnessed her life among the tribe. Paper and ink, tools of the white world that could now determine her fate. An idea began to form, one that drew on both sides of her dual existence. "I need to write a letter," she announced, interrupting the ongoing discussion. "A formal statement declaring my choice to remain here. Lieutenant Baker can take it to his commanders as official testimony." The council members exchanged glances, considering this unexpected suggestion. Would the Blue Coats honor such a paper? Chief Running Fox asked. "They respect written documents," Eliza explained. "Treaties, laws, formal declarations, these have power in their world. If I write clearly that I stay by choice, give reasons they understand, and sign my full name, it creates an official record they cannot easily dismiss." Stone Path nodded slowly. "The Wasichu live by marks on paper. Perhaps the child is right. We should fight with their weapons, not ours." With the council's approval, Eliza returned to Morning Sky's teepee and took out her precious journal. Tearing out the final blank pages, sacrificing future entries to secure her present, she began to draft what she hoped would become her declaration of belonging, a bridge between worlds that might allow her to remain in the one she had chosen. By the flickering light of a small oil lamp, a trade item Morning Sky had bartered for specifically for this purpose, Eliza worked late into the night on her letter. The first 3 attempts lay discarded, their wording too childish or too defensive. For the final version, she summoned every lesson her father had taught her about clear, persuasive writing. To the commanding officer of Fort Standing Rock. "My name is Elizabeth Ann Carlyle, formerly of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am writing to formally declare my wish to remain with the Lakota people who saved my life and have become my family." In December 1879, my parents Thomas and Margaret Carlyle, my brother William, my sister Charlotte and I were caught in a blizzard while traveling to Riverton. I alone survived, rescued by medicine woman Morning Sky, who found me near death and nursed me back to health. For 3 years, I have lived among the Lakota as an adopted daughter of Morning Sky. I have been treated with kindness and respect. I have learned their language, customs, and skills necessary for survival. I continue to maintain my English literacy and knowledge of my birth culture. I understand that the United States government has established schools for white children found among Indian tribes. While I appreciate this concern, I respectfully decline such placement. I'm not held against my will, nor am I in any danger. I have found healing from the tragic loss of my birth family through the acceptance of my Lakota family. I request that my choice be respected and recorded in official documents. When I reach 16 years of age, I will revisit this decision as agreed with Chief Running Fox. Until then, I ask that I be permitted to remain where I am most secure and content. Respectfully submitted, Elizabeth Ann Carlyle, known to the Lakota as Wichapi Luta. Morning Sky read the letter aloud in halting English, then nodded her approval. Strong words, clear mind. Lieutenant Baker returned 3 days later as promised, accompanied by the same translator and 2 additional soldiers. The camp received him with formal courtesy, but noticeable tension. Warriors positioned themselves strategically throughout the encampment, Women kept children close, and elders maintained dignified watchfulness from teepee entrances. Chief Running Fox met Baker in the central gathering area, where Eliza presented her letter with ceremony appropriate to both cultures, first offering it with both hands in the Lakota gesture of respect, then extending a firm handshake in the white man's custom. Baker read the document carefully, his expression revealing nothing. When he finished, he looked at Eliza for a long moment before speaking. "This is well written, Miss Carlyle. Your education in Philadelphia clearly provided a solid foundation." He folded the letter and placed it in his breast pocket. "I will deliver this to Colonel Harrington at Fort Standing Rock as requested. And you will tell him that I appeared healthy and uncoerced?" Eliza pressed. A hint of a smile touched Baker's lips. "I will report exactly what I observed. A remarkably self-possessed young lady who appears to have adapted extraordinarily well to circumstances that would have broken many adults." He glanced around at the assembled tribal leaders. "However, I must caution you that my report and your letter may not be the end of this matter. There are policies regarding white children living among Indian tribes." "She is not just living among us," Morning Sky stated through the translator. "She is Lakota now, my daughter in all ways that matter." Baker nodded, but made no further comment or commitment. With formal farewells, he and his small detachment departed, leaving behind an uneasy sense of temporary reprieve rather than resolution. In the weeks that followed, the tribe maintained heightened vigilance. Hunting parties reported increased. Military patrols near their traditional grounds. Summer sun dance ceremonies proceeded, but with scouts positioned to provide early warning of approaching outsiders. Autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the annual buffalo hunt. As the tribe prepared for winter migration to their sheltered valley camp, no word came from Fort Standing Rock, neither acceptance of Eliza's written declaration nor soldiers to remove her. This uncertain limbo created an underlying tension that affected daily life. Eliza found herself the subject of worried glances and protective gestures. Young warriors volunteered to accompany her, even on routine trips to gather plants with Morning Sky. Little Dove, now married to a hunter named Swifthawk and expecting her first child, insisted Eliza sleep in their teepee whenever Morning Sky was called away for healing duties. "They fear I'll be taken," Eliza observed to Morning Sky as they sorted dried herbs for winter storage. "They fear losing you," Morning Sky corrected. "Not same thing." The distinction resonated with Eliza. After 3 years, she had become woven into the fabric of tribal life, Morning Sky's apprentice, teacher of English to the younger children, bridge between cultures when occasional traders visited. Her absence would leave a hole in the community beyond the personal grief of those closest to her. As the first snows of winter dusted the plains, the tribe completed their migration to the winter camp. The familiar valley, with its sheltering hillsides and reliable wood supply, offered comfort after months of uncertainty. Here, surrounded by natural barriers and distant from established trails, the threat of unexpected visitors seemed diminished. Winter settled in with characteristic Dakota intensity, bitter cold, howling winds, snow that transformed the landscape into an unbroken white expanse. Life contracted to the essentials of survival, maintaining fires, preserving food supplies, repairing tools and clothing, sharing stories that sustained cultural memory through the long, dark evenings. For Eliza, now approaching her 12th birthday, this 4th winter with the Lakota brought a deepening of her medicinal knowledge. Morning Sky, recognizing her aptitude, began teaching more advanced healing techniques, setting bones, treating serious wounds, assisting with difficult childbirths, and the spiritual practices that accompanied physical healing. "Your hands have good medicine," Morning Sky observed, after Eliza successfully treated a young boy's badly infected wound. "They know things before your mind does." It was high praise from a woman sparing with compliments, and Eliza treasured it, storing the words alongside other markers of her growing place within the tribe. Her first successful buffalo hunt ride the previous summer, the elaborate porcupine quill, designs she had mastered under Quiet Water's tutelage, the complex Lakota stories she could now recite from memory during ceremonial gatherings. February brought a brief thaw, unusually warm days that melted surface. Snow before nighttime temperatures refroze it into treacherous ice sheets. During this weather anomaly, Little Dove went into labor 2 weeks earlier than expected. Complications developed quickly. The baby was positioned improperly, refusing to descend despite Little Dove's increasingly exhausted efforts. Morning Sky and Eliza worked together through the night, applying traditional remedies and techniques passed down through generations of Lakota women. By dawn, when Little Dove's strength was failing and the situation had become desperate, Morning Sky made an unprecedented decision. "We must use Wasichu medicine," she told Eliza quietly, away from Little Dove's hearing. "I have seen their doctors. Turn babies inside mothers. You described this from your mother's stories." Eliza nodded, remembering her mother's accounts of helping Philadelphia's midwives. "It's called version, manually repositioning the baby, but it's dangerous." "More dangerous than doing nothing?" Morning Sky asked, gesturing toward Little Dove, whose skin had taken on a grayish pallor. Working together with knowledge from both cultures, they successfully repositioned the infant. An hour later, Little Dove gave birth to a healthy boy, whom she and Swift Hawk named Strong Voice for the powerful cry he unleashed upon entering the world. The successful birth, combining Lakota healing traditions with medical knowledge Eliza had brought from her previous life, elevated her status within the tribe. Even those who had maintained distance from the Wasichu child acknowledged the value of her unique perspective. This harmony of dual identities faced its greatest test in early March, when a scout reported approaching riders, 6 uniformed, soldiers led by a civilian in a black coat. The news spread through camp with alarming speed. Warriors prepared weapons, while women gathered children inside teepees. Chief Running Fox called his council together, including Morning Sky and, significantly, Eliza herself. "They come for you," Black Fox stated without preamble. "The Wasichu have decided." "We don't know that," Morning Sky countered, though her worried expression betrayed her true thoughts. Chief Running Fox raised a hand for silence. "We will meet them with dignity, no threatening gestures, but," he added with steel in his voice, "we do not surrender one of our own without hearing their words." The delegation arrived at midday. The civilian proved to be a government Indian agent named Percival Hammond, a thin, bespectacled man with a perpetual frown. Lieutenant Baker accompanied him, along with 5 enlisted men who remained mounted at a respectful distance. Chief Running Fox, flanked by tribal elders including Morning Sky, met the visitors at the camp's edge. Eliza stood slightly behind Morning Sky, dressed in her finest Lakota clothing, but with her hair loosed from its customary braids, falling in auburn waves that emphasized her white heritage, a deliberate choice to acknowledge both sides of her identity. Hammond dismounted stiffly, his expression somewhere between discomfort and disapproval as he surveyed the Lakota leaders. "I am the appointed Indian agent for this region," he announced without greeting or ceremony. "I've come regarding the white girl living among you illegally." Lieutenant Baker winced slightly at this abrupt approach, but maintained his professional composure. "This is Elizabeth Carlyle," he said, gesturing toward Eliza, "the young lady who wrote the letter I delivered to Colonel Harrington." Hammond barely glanced at Eliza. "U.S. law is clear on this matter. White children found living among Indian tribes are to be removed and placed in appropriate educational facilities for proper reintegration into civilized society." Morning Sky stepped forward, her dignified bearing commanding attention despite her small stature. Through the translator who had accompanied the delegation, she said, "This child was not found among us. She was saved by us when her family perished. She has chosen to stay." Hammond dismissed this with an impatient wave. Children cannot make such legal determinations. The Indian Appropriations Act of 1871 provides funding specifically for the reclamation of white captives. She will be taken to the mission school at Fort Standing Rock until permanent arrangements can be made. "I am not a captive," Eliza stated, clearly moving to stand beside Morning Sky. "I wrote my wishes in the letter Lieutenant Baker delivered. I choose to remain here." Hammond finally focused his attention on her, his expression a mixture of pity and condescension. "You've been isolated from your own kind during formative years, Miss Carlyle. Your perception is understandably skewed by these circumstances." He turned to Lieutenant Baker, "Prepare to escort the girl back to Fort Standing Rock immediately." The moment hung suspended, tension crackling like static before a storm. Warriors gripped weapons. Soldiers' hands moved toward holsters. The fragile peace negotiated over decades of uneasy coexistence suddenly balanced on the fate of one child claimed by two worlds. Into this dangerous silence came an unexpected voice. "Lieutenant Baker's." "Mr. Hammond, I believe there are relevant factors you haven't considered." Hammond turned to him with evident irritation. "This isn't a matter for military deliberation, Lieutenant. I have authorization from the Bureau of Indian Affairs." "With respect, sir," Baker continued steadily, "the Carlyle case presents unique circumstances that may warrant special consideration." He removed a folded document from his uniform pocket. "I've received communication from Territorial Governor Howard regarding this situation." This revelation caused Hammond to straighten with surprise. "The governor is aware of this case." Baker nodded. After receiving Miss Carlyle's letter, Colonel Harrington forwarded the matter to higher authorities, as is protocol with unusual situations. Governor Howard has expressed interest in a more nuanced approach. He handed the document to Hammond, who scanned it with increasing consternation. "This suggests a delay in removal pending further investigation," Hammond protested. "On what grounds?" Baker met Eliza's gaze briefly before answering. "On the grounds that Miss Carlyle represents a potential diplomatic opportunity rather than a simple extraction case. Her unique position could facilitate improved relations between territorial authorities and this particular Lakota band, which has remained peaceful during recent unrest." The concept of Eliza as diplomatic asset rather than victim requiring rescue clearly had not occurred to Hammond. He reread the governor's letter, searching for loopholes or misinterpretations. Finding none, he finally conceded with poor grace. "Very well, a temporary postponement only. I will correspond directly with Governor Howard about the legal precedents being overlooked." As the delegation prepared to depart, Eliza approached Lieutenant Baker. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But why did you help us?" Baker glanced toward Hammond, ensuring their conversation remained private. "My grandmother was Cherokee," he said simply. "Removed from her family during conflicts in Tennessee. She never recovered from being rescued against her will." He adjusted his hat. "Some salvations cause more damage than the conditions they claim to address." With that cryptic personal revelation, he mounted his horse and led the delegation away, leaving behind a reprieve that Eliza understood was temporary at best. As the riders disappeared over the horizon, Morning Sky placed an arm around Eliza's shoulders. "The storm passes, but will return," she observed. "We have been given time, not victory." Eliza nodded, watching the distant dust cloud that marked the departing delegation. "Then we must use that time wisely. Spring came early, that Year, as if nature itself was rushing the seasons. By early April, the valley's snow had largely retreated to shadowed ravines, and the first brave shoots of prairie grass emerged from the thawing earth. Under normal circumstances, the tribe would be preparing for their migration to summer hunting grounds. But these were not normal circumstances. 2 weeks after Indian Agent Hammond's visit, a messenger arrived from Fort Standing Rock, a young half-Lakota scout employed by the army. He brought a letter addressed formally to Miss Elizabeth Ann, Carlisle, care of Chief Running Fox's band. The tribe gathered as Morning Sky opened the envelope and handed the document to Eliza. Reading aloud in both English and Lakota, she shared its contents. Governor Howard requested her presence at Fort Standing Rock for a formal hearing regarding her status. The letter emphasized this was not a removal order, but an invitation to present her case directly to territorial authorities, who would make the final determination. "It's a trap," Black Fox declared immediately. "Once inside the fort, they will not let you leave." Chief Running Fox studied the letter Eliza had translated. "Does it say you must go alone?" "No," Eliza confirmed after reviewing the text again. "It specifically mentions that I may bring appropriate representatives to speak on my behalf." Morning Sky nodded decisively. "Then I will go with you." Swift Fox shook his head. "The fort is dangerous for elders. Many diseases sweep through such places." "I have lived 55 winters," Morning Sky replied with dignity. "I do not fear the Wasatchu sickness as much as I fear losing this child." After extensive debate, a plan emerged. Eliza would travel to Fort Standing Rock, accompanied by Morning Sky, Yellow Horse, Black Fox's nephew, who had once been suggested as Eliza's potential husband, and Swift Hawk, Little Dove's husband. They would be escorted by Lieutenant Baker, who had included a personal note offering to guide them safely to the fort. The preparations for this journey took on the solemnity of ritual. Special garments were created. Eliza would wear a carefully designed combination of Lakota and white styling. Her dress, made from traded cotton fabric rather than deerskin, followed the basic pattern of white women's wear, but incorporated traditional Lakota beadwork around the collar and cuffs. Her hair would be arranged in a single braid, adorned with a single eagle feather gifted by Chief Running Fox to symbolize tribal membership. "You must walk in both worlds now," Morning Sky explained, as they packed medicine bundles and food for the journey. "Show them you honor both paths." The most precious item Eliza packed was her journal, now containing 4 years of entries documenting her life with the Lakota. The early pages recorded her initial confusion and grief, gradually giving way to descriptions of new skills learned, relationships formed, and her growing understanding of Lakota spiritual and cultural practices. "These written words may speak when yours cannot," Morning Sky observed, as Eliza carefully wrapped the journal in protective hide. Lieutenant Baker arrived with 2 soldiers on the appointed day. His manner was formal but respectful, as he explained. The journey would take approximately 3 days at a comfortable pace. "The governor has arranged for your party to have separate quarters during your stay at the fort," he informed them. "You will not be housed with either the enlisted men's families or the Indian Agency residents." This considerate detail suggested Governor Howard was indeed approaching the situation with unusual sensitivity, offering a small fragment of hope amid the greater uncertainty. The farewell ceremony was brief but emotional. Little Dove, cradling baby-strong voice, embraced Eliza fiercely. "Return to us," she whispered. "My son needs his medicine woman aunt to teach him." Jumping Rabbit, now 10 and increasingly aware of the precarious nature of Lakota existence, pressed a small carved wooden fox into Eliza's hand. "For protection," he explained seriously. "Fox is clever, finds paths others cannot see." Chief Running Fox addressed her last, placing his hands on her shoulders in the traditional blessing gesture. "Wichapi Luta," You carry our words to the Ida. Was it you leaders? Speak with a straight tongue and clear eyes. Remember who you are, child of two worlds, but daughter of this tribe in your heart. The journey to Fort Standing Rock followed the winding course of the Grand River eastward. Lieutenant Baker set an unhurried pace, allowing Morning Sky's aging mare to keep up without strain. During evening camps, the atmosphere remained cordial, if guarded, with Yellow Horse and Swift Hawk taking alternating watches despite Baker's assurances of safety. On the second night, after the soldiers had retired to their bedrolls, Eliza found herself sitting beside the fire with Lieutenant Baker. The officer seemed contemplative as he stared into the flames. "May I ask you something, Lieutenant?" Eliza ventured. He nodded, his expression open. "Why did you mention your Cherokee grandmother to me? You took a risk opposing Agent Hammond." Baker poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "My grandmother was taken from her family when she was 12, about your age. She was placed with a minister's family in Nashville, forced to speak only English, punished for practicing any Cherokee customs." He paused. "She lived 50 more years, became a proper minister's wife, raised my father to be a civilized Christian man. But she was never whole." He met Eliza's gaze directly. "On her deathbed, she spoke Cherokee for the first time in decades. No one in the family understood her final words. That strikes me as a particular kind of tragedy. To die unable to be understood by the family you raised." The personal revelation hung in the night air between them, offering Eliza a glimpse of complexity she hadn't previously attributed to the military officer. "What will happen at the fort?" she asked after a respectful silence. "Governor Howard will conduct a hearing, informal but official. He'll question you about your circumstances, your wishes, your understanding of the alternatives." Baker hesitated. He's a political man, but generally fair-minded. He's facing pressure from missionary societies and Indian reformers who believe white children should be rescued from tribal influence, but he's also pragmatic about maintaining peaceful relations with cooperative bands like Chief Running Foxes. "And Agent Hammond." Baker's expression darkened slightly. "Hammond represents Bureau of Indian Affairs policy without nuance or exception. He'll argue that allowing you to remain sets a dangerous precedent. But I'm hardly the first white child adopted by native people," Eliza pointed out. "No, but you're among the first whose case has received territorial-level attention during this particular political climate." Baker set aside his stick. "Indian policy is shifting, Miss Carlyle. There's increasing pressure to civilize and assimilate native peoples, eliminate traditional practices, transform them into Christian farmers on individual land allotments." Morning Sky, who had been listening silently from her place near the fire, spoke through Eliza's translation. "They have tried this before. Different words, same meaning. Make us not Lakota." Baker nodded soberly. "Your situation touches on these larger questions. Can different peoples and traditions coexist with mutual respect, or must one always dominate and erase the other?" The weight of this geopolitical context, far larger than her individual circumstances, settled onto Eliza's young shoulders. Her personal desire to remain with her adopted family had become entangled with forces reshaping the entire western frontier. On the afternoon of the third day, Fort Standing Rock appeared on the horizon, a sprawling compound of wooden buildings surrounded by a high stockade fence. The American flag fluttered above the central blockhouse, its colors bright against the spring sky. As they approached, Eliza studied the fort with intensifying apprehension. Unlike the organic circle of a Lakota camp, the military installation imposed rigid geometry upon the landscape, straight lines, right angles, structures arranged in precise rows like the Philadelphia city blocks of her early childhood. Near the fort, they passed the Associated Indian Agency buildings and the Mission School, a large, austere structure with small windows and a prominent cross mounted above its entrance. Children in identical dark clothing played in a fenced yard under the watchful eye of a black-robed figure. "That would have been your destination if Hammond had his way," Baker commented, following Eliza's gaze. Morning Sky, observing the regimented scene, reached over to squeeze Eliza's hand. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Whatever happened in the coming days, they would face it together as family. At the fort entrance, they were met by an official welcoming party. Colonel Harrington, the fort commander, Reverend Stillwell, of the mission school, and a distinguished-looking older man in a formal black suit who introduced himself as Territorial Governor Howard. "Miss Carlyle," the governor said, extending his hand to Eliza, "your situation has generated considerable interest. I'm pleased you accepted my invitation to discuss it properly." Eliza shook his hand firmly, as her father had taught her long ago in Philadelphia. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak for myself, Governor Howard. May I present Morning Sky, my adoptive mother and the medicine woman who saved my life, Yellow Horse and Swift Hawk, representatives of Chief Running Fox's council." The governor acknowledged each with a respectful nod, though Colonel Harrington and Reverend Stillwell merely offered curt nods. "We've prepared quarters for your party," Governor Howard continued. "The hearing will begin tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock in the administration building. I suggest you rest and prepare yourselves." As they were escorted to their assigned cabin, a small but clean structure normally used for visiting officials, Eliza noted Agent Hammond watching from the doorway of the administration building, his expression suggesting the battle was far from over. That evening, as Eliza helped Morning Sky arrange their sleeping area, the elder medicine woman unpacked a small bundle wrapped in soft hide. "Tonight, we prepare your spirit for tomorrow's words," she said, revealing a collection of sacred items, a small pouch of tobacco for offerings, a braid of sweetgrass, an eagle feather matching the one in Eliza's hair. "These things are forbidden. Inside the fort," Eliza whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. Morning Sky smiled sadly. "This is what they fear most. Not our weapons, but our ceremonies, our connection to the ancestors and the earth. This is why they take children, cut their hair, change their names." She placed the items on a small cloth between them. "Tonight, we remember who we are, so tomorrow you can speak from that truth." Under the wooden roof of a military structure, surrounded by the forces gathering to determine her fate, Eliza participated in the quiet ceremony that connected her to the traditions that had healed not just her frostbitten body 4 years earlier, but her shattered spirit as well. As Morning Sky sang softly in Lakota, her weathered hands moving through the sacred materials with practiced grace, Eliza closed her eyes and found her center, no longer simply the traumatized child rescued from certain death, but a young woman standing confidently at the intersection of two worlds, preparing to fight for her right to determine her own path. Dawn arrived with military precision at Fort Standing Rock, announced by the bugle call that echoed across the compound. Eliza had been awake for hours, her mind cycling through possible questions and answers for the hearing. Morning Sky had slept little as well, her quiet prayers continuing intermittently throughout the night. Yellow Horse and Swift Hawk had maintained their own preparations, fasting since the previous evening, a traditional practice before important councils or battles. Their solemn dedication to her cause touched Eliza deeply. These warriors, who had once viewed her with suspicion, now risked entering a military fort to support her. Lieutenant Baker arrived at precisely 8 o'clock to escort them to the administration building. "The governor has allowed a brief postponement of regular fort business for this hearing," he explained. "Colonel Harrington has reluctantly cleared the main conference room." As they crossed the parade ground, Eliza was acutely aware of the stares from soldiers and civilian staff. Her carefully chosen attire, the hybrid dress that honored both her origins and her adopted culture, drew particular attention. She walked with deliberate posture, neither the hesitant shuffle expected of a traumatized captive nor the stoic bearing of her Lakota companions, but with the dignified carriage morning sky had taught her. Walk as if the ancestors watch your path. The administration building's conference room had been arranged like a courtroom. A large desk positioned at the front would seat Governor Howard. Two smaller tables faced it, one where Agent Hammond already sat with Reverend Stillwell, and Colonel Harrington, the other empty, awaiting Eliza and her supporters. Territorial officials, military officers, and several civilians Eliza didn't recognize filled the observer seats. Among them, she noticed a man with a small notebook, a newspaper reporter, judging by his eager expression and ready pencil. "The press has taken interest in your case," Baker murmured as he guided them to their table. "The Bismarck Tribune sent a correspondent." This unexpected development added another layer of complexity. Eliza's fate might now influence public opinion beyond the fort's walls, for better or worse. At precisely 9 o'clock, a side door opened, and Governor Howard entered. Everyone stood as he took his place at the central desk. "Be seated," he instructed, arranging papers before him. "This is an informal hearing to determine the appropriate status and placement of Elizabeth Ann Carlyle, orphaned in Dakota Territory approximately 4 years ago, and subsequently living among the Lakota." He looked directly at Eliza. "While I recognize there are significant policy implications in this matter, my primary concern is the welfare of the child in question." Agent Hammond immediately raised his hand. "Governor, before proceedings continue, I must register the Bureau of Indian Affairs' position that this hearing itself contravenes established federal policy regarding white captives." "Your objection is noted, Mr. Hammond," Governor Howard replied evenly. "However, as territorial governor, I have discretion in unusual cases to evaluate individual circumstances before applying federal directives." He turned to Eliza. "Miss Carlyle, would you please stand and tell us your story in your own words?" Heart pounding but voice steady, Eliza rose and faced the room. Beginning with her family's departure from Philadelphia, she recounted their journey west, the devastating blizzard, her desperate attempt to find help, and Morning Sky's discovery of her near death in the snow. She described her healing, physical and emotional, under Morning Sky's care. She explained the tribe's initial debate about her fate and their eventual acceptance of her as a member of their community. She spoke of learning Lakota ways while maintaining her English literacy and memories of her birth family. "I stand before you as both Elizabeth Carlyle and Wichapi Luta," she concluded. "I honor my parents' memory by surviving as they wished. Me too? And I honor Morning Sky's gift of life by living as her daughter. I ask that you allow me to remain with the family that claimed me when I had no one else." The governor listened attentively throughout her testimony, occasionally making notes. When she finished, he asked several clarifying questions about her education, daily activities, and understanding of both cultures. "You've clearly maintained your English eloquence," he observed. "Do you practice reading and writing regularly?" "Yes, sir. I still have my primer and I keep a journal. I also teach English to several children in the tribe who expressed interest." This information visibly surprised Reverend Stillwell, whose mission school focused on teaching native children English. Next, through an interpreter, Morning Sky spoke of finding Eliza, the medical treatments that saved her from fatal frostbite, and the spiritual healing that helped the child overcome her trauma. Her testimony, delivered with the quiet authority of a respected healer, silenced even Agent Hammond. Temporarily. "I have 7 grandchildren of my own blood," Morning Sky concluded. "Wichapi Luta is no different in my heart. The Great Spirit placed her in my path for a reason. Who am I to question this purpose? Yellow Horse and Swift Hawk provided briefer statements, emphasizing Eliza's integration into tribal life and the respect she had earned through her contributions to the community. When Eliza's supporters finished, Governor Howard turned to the opposing table. "Mr. Hammond, you may present your perspective." The Indian agent approached the matter with bureaucratic precision, citing numerous policies, precedents, and regulations governing Indian-white relations. His primary argument centered on the civilizing mission of government Indian policy and the moral imperative to restore white children to their proper cultural context. While the Lakota may have provided physical safety, Hammond asserted, they cannot provide the educational, religious, and social foundations necessary for Miss Carlisle's development as an American citizen. The longer she remains in a tribal environment, the more difficult her eventual reintegration will become. Reverend Stilwell followed with an impassioned speech about the spiritual dangers of pagan influences and the mission school's success in salvaging young souls from traditional native practices. Colonel Harrington spoke last, focusing on security concerns. Allowing a white child to remain with a tribe, however seemingly peaceful at present, establishes a troubling precedent that could endanger other settlers' children and complicate military objectives in maintaining order on the frontier. Throughout these arguments, Eliza maintained a composed expression, though beneath the table her hands trembled slightly. Morning Sky reached over, covering Eliza's hand with her own weathered one, providing silent strength. When all testimonies concluded, Governor Howard called for a brief recess to consider his decision. The tension in the room was palpable as he departed through the side door, leaving Eliza and her supporters to wait under the watchful eyes of Hammond and his allies. "You spoke well," Lieutenant Baker commented quietly. "Few children your age who could have presented themselves with such clarity." "I'm not just any child," Eliza replied. "I'm Morning Sky's daughter." The simple statement, delivered with quiet conviction, drew a small smile from the lieutenant and a proud nod from Morning Sky. After 30 minutes that felt like hours, Governor Howard returned. The room fell silent as he resumed his seat and arranged his notes before him. "This case presents unprecedented complexities," he began. "Federal policy indeed establishes clear procedures for returning white children found among Indian tribes. However, these policies were primarily designed for children captured during hostile actions, not those rescued and voluntarily adopted under circumstances like Miss Carlisle's." He looked directly at Eliza. "I find Miss Carlisle to be exceptionally articulate, thoughtful, and clear about her wishes. While only 12 years of age, she demonstrates understanding beyond her years, likely accelerated by the extraordinary circumstances of her life." Turning to Morning Sky, he continued, "I also find the care provided by Morning Sky and her community to be genuine, substantial, and beneficial to the child's well-being. There is no evidence of coercion or mistreatment, quite the contrary." Agent Hammond shifted impatiently in his seat, clearly anticipating where the governor's remarks were leading. "Therefore," Governor Howard announced, "I am implementing a compromise solution that acknowledges both Miss Carlisle's expressed wishes and the legitimate concerns about her ongoing education." He outlined his decision. Eliza would remain officially under Morning Sky's guardianship, continuing to live with the Lakota. However, she would attend the fort school 3 months each year during winter when the tribe camped in their nearby valley. Additionally, she would receive periodic visits from educational officials to assess her development. At 16, as originally agreed with Chief Running Fox, she would make a final determination about her permanent status. "This arrangement," Governor Howard concluded, "respects the genuine family bonds that have formed while ensuring Miss Carlisle maintains educational connections to her birth culture. It also recognizes the unique bridge she represents between our communities, a role that may prove valuable to peaceful relations in this territory. Agent Hammond immediately protested. "Governor, this directly contravenes—" "My decision is final, Mr. Hammond," Governor Howard interrupted firmly. "You may register your objections with the Department of Interior if you wish, but until overruled by federal authorities, this arrangement stands." He brought down a small gavel, officially concluding the hearing. The compromise was imperfect. The required school attendance would separate Eliza from the tribe during portions of each year, and the continued oversight meant her status remained somewhat provisional. Yet as they left the administration building, the overwhelming emotion Eliza felt was relief. She would return home with morning sky. The path ahead contained challenges, but it was a path she could walk. Lieutenant Baker escorted them back to their quarters. "The governor took a political risk with that decision," he commented. "Hammond won't let this rest." "But we have time now," Eliza replied. "Time for things to change." "Yes," Baker agreed thoughtfully. "And in my experience, time often reveals solutions invisible in the heat of immediate conflict." They departed Fort Standing Rock the following morning, accompanied again by Baker and his soldiers. The return journey felt lighter, conversation flowing more easily among the travelers. Even Yellow Horse, typically the most reserved, occasionally joined in, asking Baker surprisingly detailed questions about military operations and territorial politics. As they approached the valley where the winter camp had stood months earlier, Baker informed them that a military escort would return in late November to accompany Eliza to the fort for her first educational session. "I've requested to lead that detail myself," he added, "to ensure continuity." The tribe had already migrated to summer hunting grounds, following the buffalo herds north. With Baker's assistance, Eliza and her companions traveled for 5 more days before finally rejoining their people on the expansive northern plains. Their return sparked celebration, a welcoming ceremony that honored not just their safe journey, but the partial victory they had secured. Chief Running Fox formally acknowledged Governor Howard's decision, accepting the compromise as a reasonable recognition of Lakota rights in a changing world. That evening, as the celebration continued around the central fires, Eliza sought a moment of solitude on a small hill overlooking the camp. The setting sun painted the endless grasslands in gold and amber, while the first stars appeared in the deepening blue above. Morning sky found her there, settling beside her with the comfortable silence of true family. "Your path will not be easy," the elder woman observed after a while. "Walking between worlds never is." "But it's my path," Eliza replied. "Not chosen for me by others, but shaped by my own hands." She touched the eagle feather in her hair, symbol of her Lakota identity. Then the small cross her mother had given her before their journey west, which she kept on a cord around her neck. Morning Sky nodded in understanding. "The snake sheds its skin, but remains itself underneath. You will wear different clothes at the fort school, speak different words, learn different ways. But here," she touched Eliza's chest above her heart, "you remain Wichapi Luta, daughter of Morning Sky, granddaughter of the Buffalo people." In the 8 years that followed, Eliza walked her unique path with growing confidence. The seasonal, educational sessions at Fort Standing Rock, initially dreaded, became opportunities to strengthen her knowledge of both worlds. She excelled in formal studies, impressing even the skeptical mission teachers with her quick mind and determined work ethic. When she returned to the tribe each spring, she brought new knowledge to share. Medical advancements that complemented traditional healing practices, legal concepts that helped the tribe navigate increasingly complicated treaty negotiations, agricultural techniques that supplemented traditional food gathering when buffalo herds diminished from overhunting. By her 16th birthday, when the time came to make her final decision as required by Governor Howard's ruling, there was little doubt in anyone's mind what she would choose. In a formal ceremony attended by tribal leaders, military officials, and territorial representatives, Elizabeth Eliza Carlyle, also known as Wichapi Luta, declared her intention to remain with her Lakota family while continuing to serve as a bridge between cultures. Territorial authorities, recognizing the unique value of someone who moved fluently between worlds during increasingly tense Indian-white relations, officially appointed her as a cultural liaison and interpreter. This position, created specifically for her unprecedented circumstances, acknowledged both her Lakota identity and her white heritage. Morning Sky, now in her 60s but still vital and respected, watched with quiet pride as her adopted daughter grew into this challenging role. The bond between them, forged in a desperate rescue during a Dakota blizzard and strengthened through years of shared experience, transcended blood, culture, and the tumultuous history dividing their peoples. "Some lives are like rivers," Morning Sky observed on Eliza's 20th birthday. "They flow in one direction, following the path cut before them, but some, the most important ones, are like still lakes that reflect both earth and sky, allowing others to see themselves and the heavens in the same glance." Eliza understood the profound truth in these words. Her life's greatest value lay not in choosing one world over another, but in embracing both, creating space where different perspectives could meet without destruction. The orphaned girl who survived a blizzard became a woman who built bridges between Lakota traditions and white innovations, between ancient wisdom and new realities, between worlds that so often collided in conflict rather than connecting in understanding. And, though the path was never easy, walking it with one foot in each world, she never truly walked alone. For Morning Sky, the Lakota medicine woman who had been meant merely to find her remains, had instead found a daughter. Together, they created a family bound not by blood, but by something even stronger, the deliberate choice, renewed each day, to love across boundaries that others could not or would not cross. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.